Okay, welcome back to Parsha Insights. This week's Parsha is Naso. We're in the unusual scenario of once again being out of sync with our sisters and brothers in the land of Israel. Because the last day of, so Becky representing us in Eretz Yisrael, and because of the second day of Shavuot, right? So in Israel, they have one day of Yantiv, and so what for us was the second day of Shavuot, for Israel was just Shabbat. So on that just Shabbat in Israel, they read Parshat Naso, whereas we were reading the special reading for Parshat Shavuot. So they're living in the future. In Israel, they're living in the future. They're always going to be a week ahead, at least until we catch up later on in the summer. We'll have our double Parsha. We'll have a double Parsha outside of Israel. Israel will only have a single Parsha, and we'll all come back together in time for Elul, in time for Tisha B'Av. Actually, it's going to happen right before Tisha B'Av, so we're all going to come back together. It will be wonderful. But until then, Becky, this is old news for you, but for us, this is very relevant. Parsha Naso, and we're going to jump right into it by sharing the source sheet. And we're going to take a look at an aspect of the Torah portion which we often don't look at, which is the idea of the sota. So just to explain, and stop sharing for a moment, just to explain, the sota is the ritual. The Parshat Naso is firstly the longest parsha in the Torah in terms of the verses, 176 verses. Your good Jewish trivia is that 176 is the number of the longest in Judaism. It's the longest Parasha, Torah portion, 176 verses. The longest tractate in the Talmud is tractate Bava Batra, which has 176 pages, so also number 176. And the longest psalm is Psalm number, not 176, because the Psalms only go up to 150. It's Psalm 119, which has 176 verses. And so 176 is a commonality when we're talking about the length of a tractate or of a psalm or of the Parsha, 176. And we have fascinating components of the Parsha, including the priestly blessing, including the Nazir, the Nazarite vow, including the gifts of the Nasim, and including the story or this commandment of the Sota. So we're not going to be talking about the details of the commandment today, because the commandment, or for many reasons, but the commandment is a very difficult one to understand. It deals with fidelity and infidelity in marriage. It deals with suspicion, and it is a mystical rite that was meant to clarify the innocence or lack thereof of a wife who has been suspected of secluding with another man against which she has been warned, who is not her husband. She has been warned, she's secluded, there are no witnesses, and he suspects her, and therefore they go down to the holy temple or the tabernacle, and the rite of the sota, of the water, is administered. We're familiar, I think, with this story from popular culture or whatever. She drinks the water that has the text, the scriptural text mixed in with the water. She drinks the water, and there are two possibilities. Possibility number one, she is guilty, and possibility number two, she is innocent, and she is blessed with a child, and blessed in many ways, and Baruch Hashem, all will be good. That's the story of the Sota in short. But we're not going to talk about the Sota itself, but one detail of the ritual, which we're going to look at for a moment. So firstly, the word Sota is not a word that the Torah uses. The word Sota is more of a rabbinic word, and we're going to take a look for a moment. So this is taken from a website called the Hebrew Academy, which is a website from Israel. It speaks about the Hebrew language. So it's talking about the word Sota, or Soteh would be the masculine form. Who is somebody who is Soteh or Sota? So the Hagdara, the definition, is the first one, Sar min haderech. And by the way, you'll see it says right here, Kativ Mikrai. The way that it's written in the Torah, in the Parsha, is look at the word. You see the difference? That first letter is not a samech, is not the round samech that we see here, but rather it is the letter sin in the Torah. We're going to take a look at that in the verses. It's written a little bit differently, and that's going to be a really important difference for us. But the idea of a sota is somebody who has sar min haderech, somebody who has deviated from
the way.
Yeah, somebody who has left what we've considered to be the mainstream and the norm. Harig means unusual. Somebody who, and then it says here in halacha, the sotah, and the last one, the sotah, is isha habogeret b'ba'ala, is a woman who rebels, but a woman who has infidelity against her husband. So that's the definition of this word soteh. We're going to look at it within the Torah, sotah, and we're going to look at it within the Parasha, because the Parasha uses this word sotah, but as a verb. It's not the sotah, but a woman who is soteh, who is the verb. So
is there a parallel for a man? Does a man ever being charged with adultery?
Good question. Good question.
Excellent question. Not in the Bible, because polygamy was permitted.
Yeah, but beyond polygamy,
men, and multiple relations were permitted for men. The idea of exclusivity is an idea of a wife to her husband alone in the Torah.
But beyond concubines, if you have a concubine, it's considered as like a different status of a wife. But are you allowed to go out to prostitutes? I mean, like, isn't there any kind of ramification for the man to go outside the bounds of either his wife or his concubines?
No, I mean, we're talking about halachic realities. I want to keep this on the Tanakh level. On the Tanakh level, this is not addressed. The only thing that's addressed is a woman to her husband, is the idea of the sotah.
But the rabbis, after they realized that this did occur with the husbands, they then stopped the talich of the sotah. So
yes.
It's not exactly.
Yes, absolutely. This is not a relevant halacha. This is nothing that will ever be practiced. And in fact, the Midrashim and the Talmud all put a stop to this and said, no, this is not happening. As soon this was something firstly only in Israel, only the time that Israel was doing the ratzon of Hashem, the will of God. And once all that stopped, and the Talmud says once znut, once illicit behavior became so prevalent, the sotah ritual went by the wayside. It's almost counterintuitive. Like when you need it, it's when there's so much illicit behavior happening, why not keep this deterrent ritual? No, because that's not the point of it. It's not a deterrent ritual. It's not something that's meant to be widespread. This was meant to be in a particular refined period of time, and once that refined period of time passed, it didn't have its relevance. And so the verse that introduces this in the 5th chapter of Bamidbar, in our Parsha this week, in Naso, Daber b'nei Yisrael martalehem, speak to the children of Israel, say to them, Ish ki tiste ishto, when his wife goes astray. That's how it's translated. So the word sotah is coming from these letters, listot, soteh. And we're going to look at a unique difference. And what the Talmud is going to say is, look at this word, a woman who goes astray, sotah. It reminds us of another word. You know what other word it reminds us of? Take that sin and turn it into a shin. Shoteh.
Soteh?
From
A
drink.
shoteh.
Yeah.
No, with the letter tet, not with the letter tough.
Oh,
Letter tough would be to drink, lishtot,
Drink.
to
Yeah.
drink.
Shtot, yeah.
Shtot. But shoteh,
Like
with
an idiot.
a tet, is a fool, is an imbecile, is an idiot. A shaita. Shoteh. So look at what the Talmud says. Reish Lakish amar, Ein adam over avera ela im kein nichnas bo ruach shtut. A person does not commit a sin unless the spirit of shtut. Do you see the similarity between this word and soteh? Shtut, soteh, shoteh. It's the same word. And so Reish Lakish in the Talmud in Tractate Sotah says that anytime a person, not just this sin, but any sin is committed because of what we call the ruach shtut, the spirit of foolishness, as it says ish ki tiste ishto. So the proof text of this, tiste, is the sota. So what we're saying is that this sota becomes the paradigm for all sin. When a person is over an avera, when a person commits a transgression, it's because of shtut, and we learn because of foolishness, and we learn foolishness from the sota. So there's something here, and this is Rav Moshe Shapiro, as we come to know and love his teachings. He says there's something in this mitzvah which is pointing at the essence of a concept. There's something in the sota which references the essence of sin in general. And what is it? So clearly the subject of the straying wife is not a sin among other sins, but rather the father of all sins. That's maybe an awkward translation from the Hebrew, but when we talk in Hebrew about an av is a father, but it really means the paragon or the paradigm for all sin. Here in particular, we find the root of straying and foolishness. So what is it? What are we talking about? So looking at a shared root, the Torah often employs expressions of straying. The Hebrew word that refers to harlotry is znut or znus. It means also turning in the wrong direction. Strength in the path and following, straying from the path and following something else. As we see in the Shema, zonim achareihem. So harlotry and straying. So this idea of soteh, to stray, to go aside, and foolishness and harlotry, it's all straying. So what is this path that we're on, that we're straying from? The paved and organized path that proceeds correctly is expressed by the Hebrew word shita. When we talk about a shita, somebody has a shita in life. That means they have a path. They have a concept. They have an organizing principle. They have a system that they live by. Shita is organization. But that's the same root word as shota, as foolishness. And we even see them juxtaposed. So how can you have one word, shota and shita, mean both foolish, which means straying from the path, and system, which means the path itself? How can you have one word meaning opposites? And by the way, the Talmud employs this. And the Talmud says, look at us. Look at the great moment where the rabbis were dancing in front of the brides, right? This is from the famous Talmud in which they say, Ketzad Maraktim Lifnei Hakala. What do you say? What do you say or sing when you're dancing in front of the bride? And Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel says, Kala na v'chasuda. You say the bride is beautiful and wonderful and gracious no matter what she looks like. You praise her and you say good things. And Beit Shammai says, Kala kamotchehi, that you say, you describe her exactly as she is. You have to, truth at all costs. That's what Beit Shammai says. And then they talk other examples. And the Talmud continues, and it talks about Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai would take a myrtle branch, would take a hadas, and dance before the bride. He would take these, he would use props, and he would do dancing, and he would say, Kala na'a, and he would say, Kala na'a v'chasuda, a fair and attractive bride. Right? So that's Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai. And let's give other examples. Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak would base his dance on 3 myrtle branches that he would juggle, right? The very talented rabbis, multifaceted, they are juggling myrtle branches while singing Kala na'a v'chasuda. Isn't this beautiful? This is so inspiring. And Rabbi Zera said, wait a second, the old man, referring to Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak, he's humiliating us. He's humiliating the rabbis. Look at this rabbi. He's juggling. What does he think he is, a clown? Ridiculous. He's embarrassing all rabbis, all Torah scholars. However, these are important names. Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak is the one who is juggling the myrtle branches, and Rabbi Zera is criticizing him. When the first rabbi, the juggler dancer, when he passes away, a pillar of fire demarcated between him and everyone else. And we learn through tradition that a pillar of fire demarcates only for either one person in generation or 2 people in generation. Basically, when he died, there was a heavenly sign that said, this guy was special. This guy was 1 in a generation, or maybe maximum 2 in a generation. So now, Rabbi Zera, who criticized this guy, who said, "You're making a fool out of us with the way that you dance at these weddings." Now that he saw that when he died, he got the heavenly approbation, and he was a tzaddik. So Rabbi Scheier offers a few opinions, and it all has to do with a play on words. So the three words are shotite, shtute, or shitate. And it's all basically the same word, three different ways. And it means three different things. Either his branch, meaning his myrtle branch that he danced with, was effective for him, his nonsense was effective for him, or his method, his system, was effective for him. We don't know which one it's at. This is the way the tradition is coming down, that Rabbi Scheier made a comment. And he said, this rabbi, something worked for him. What was it? We don't know. We have three similar words that have come down to us through tradition, which is his branch, the branch that he would dance with, his nonsense, or his system. All of them work for this rabbi. But
first of all, there's a mitzvah that says l'sameach et hachatan v'et hakala. So what they were doing was basically just, misameach et hachatan v'et hakala. And when they say kala is yafa v'chasuda, she is definitely that way toward her chatan. Otherwise, he wouldn't be marrying her. So it doesn't make a difference what you see or what I see. He sees in her soul, or he sees whatever he sees. He thinks she's beautiful. So therefore, the kala is beautiful. Yeah,
there is an argument, and that's a separate topic that I mentioned. That there is an argument to say that that even Beit Hillel could be grounded in truth, even though it's it could be a subjective truth for the groom. He clearly finds her beautiful. But the same word, the point being that the same Hebrew word is basically shtute, shitate, is being used for nonsense and being used for method, which are two opposite concepts. So how do we have this? And he says, by the way, this connects to other root words in the Holy Tongue, in Lashon HaKodesh, that have opposite meanings. And we've talked about this before. The essence of something is the ikar, and to uproot something is le'aker. Or pakod is to count, and nifkad, something that's nifkad, is uncounted in biblical Hebrew. So you have sometimes the same word that's used to mean the same thing. There are examples in English as well. I'm trying to think of what some example, something that was inflammable, I guess, or there are certain examples that could be used to mean that the same word could be used to mean opposites. Okay. And by the way, just another example that we're not going to read this inside, but the Talmud talks about a hadas shoteh. Hadas is a myrtle branch, but this is within the context of Sukkot and using the hadassim on Sukkot. And what are the requirements of the myrtle in order to be kosher? And so one opinion says they all have to kind of come from the same base. You have to have three leaves that come out on the same level. If you're looking up the spine or up the length of a myrtle branch, you're going to see three leaves come out basically around the same level. But there are some which have two on one level and one on another, two on another, one on another, and so on and so forth. There's a debate as to whether that's kosher or not, and they say that's called a hadas shoteh. A myrtle branch with that configuration of 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 is called a myrtle shoteh because it deviates from the norm. It's off center a little bit. There's a straight course, and any departure from it warrants the designation shoteh of somebody who is a fool who deviates from it. Okay, that's part one, which is sota is connected to shoteh. Somebody in the biblical case is somebody who deviates, who strays from her marriage, is connected to a foolish person who strays from the path that they're supposed to be on. That's it. That's point number one. Any questions, comments, or complaints?
I'd like to go back to the concept of which is, I think, different now, that the husband bears no liability in this. Everything is focused on the woman. And somehow I don't think it's fair. And somehow, it strikes me that they're being put under pressure for things they may not have done on their own. I mean, the man may have started something, So why do they get such a clean bill?
I 100% agree with you. It is not fair. It is an aspect of biblical law that we struggle with, and this would never be applied in modern times. I'm with you. But that's the biblical law. Biblical law places the onus, the burden of faithfulness within the marriage, at least in the context of this punishment, of this particular punishment, on the woman exclusively. It's not fair. It's not right.
There are parts of Masechet Sotah that say just the opposite. They say to the husband, look at what your life is like, and see maybe you're responsible for the way
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's part of Masechet Sotah. That's the same Masechet Sotah. That's the end of Masechet Sotah.
Absolutely, but that's already later, right? That's already the sages who are coming in and saying, wait a second, there's a burden of responsibility on the husband here. And anybody who would suspect his wife of doing something has something suspect about himself as well, and has to look at his own actions. Absolutely. Vivian suggested, could it be because only she truly knows who the father of the child would be, that there's something about the certainty of lineage that we're holding a woman to a higher standard because of the definite nature of lineage from a child to a parent can only be established with a woman, can never be established with a man, at least in pre-scientific times, regardless of how similar the child looked to the father. There's no absolute determination without modern DNA testing. So that could be also another consideration why women were held to a higher standard, because of the purity of the lineage as only established through a woman. Good point. Thank you.
But my question beyond what she said, that the burden of responsibility at the end of Masechet Sotah is also placed on the husband. What about if this woman had a relationship with another man? That man has no responsibility at all that he is having a relationship with a married woman.
He dies.
He does.
He is also punished, but that's not the ritual of Sotah. Like the ritual of Sotah, which we want to focus on.
It's only for the woman. It's only for the
really
woman.
The woman and the drink and whatever it is. Now we're going to look at one nuance. Oh, yeah, Susan?
I'm very upset about all of this, because it's not fair that only the woman gets blamed and it's okay for the man to go and, excuse my language, Rabbi, screw around, but the woman can't, and she gets vilified, and the man gets away with it. For every woman that gets touched, there's a man that did it.
Yes. There is.
So I know it's a modern sensibility.
There is a horrible double standard that is contained within this law, and it's okay to say it, and it's okay to acknowledge it, and it's okay to struggle with it. And we will have our day to struggle with it. I'm using the teaching of Rav Moshe Shapiro as a way of trying to bring meaning and try to understand one component of the ritual, because I think it's very interesting. But on a moral level, I'm completely with you. And there's a reason why this ritual has not been practiced. That this is part of Jewish life.
Why was the woman vulnerable to needing this? What did the man do to that happened? Yeah.
All good. All excellent points. Okay, let me go on with the ritual, please. The soil of the tabernacle. So Nachmanides points out something very interesting. So he said, right, about the ritual, that there's the water, the maize sotah, the waters of the sotah, which is a special mixture, and she drinks it, and her innocence and is determined through this, or guilt is determined through this. How does this work? Right? How exactly does this work? It's a miracle. And Nachmanides, Ramban, points out that this is unique amongst all of the commandments. Now, there's nothing amongst all of the ordinances of the Torah which depends upon a miracle, except for this matter. This is the only time where a mitzvah needs a miracle in order to work, right? Which is a permanent wonder and miracle that will happen in Israel. So just to point that out, That's fascinating. And what happens? The actual ritual, the priest brings her forward and has her stand before God. And the priest takes the sacred water in an earthen vessel and takes some of the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle, and the priest puts it in the water so that it makes this dirty mixture of earth and water. And I tell you the truth, until I studied Tractate Sota, and until I looked at it, I don't think I knew this part of the ritual. I don't think I ever read closely enough the ritual. Maybe I was always so disturbed by what I was reading that I didn't notice the earth that he's taking dust from the floor of the tabernacle. Why is he taking dust? What does this have to do with anything whatsoever? And so here comes our path of trying to understand the dust and what the dust means. Because when you see dust, what do you think of? Right? When you see dust, what in the Bible, what do you think? When I say dust in the Bible,
it's dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Dust to dust.
Okay, dust to dust. What else?
We were born from afar. We were born from two extremities.
Good.
One with afar and one is Tzelem Elokim.
Good. We are created when God blows into the nostrils of man, right? The creation story, we are created from dust. Okay. Right. And there is also the line, and we're going to look at that as well, but there's also the phrase, Abraham says, you know, I'll do here, I venture to speak to my Lord, Va'anochi afar ve'efer, I am but dust and ashes. And the Talmud says something fascinating. Amar Rava, here we go. Why did the Torah include dust in the Sota ritual? Why does it include this dirt? Because it's connected to Abraham. Abraham said, I am but dust and ashes. Because if she merits to be proven faithful, she'll be merit to have a child like Abraham. But if she does not merit to be proven faithful, so shall she die and return to her dust, the soil from which mankind was formed. She will die. And so this dust is the duality. It represents Abraham, the humility and the holiness of Abraham, and it represents death. And it represents returning to the dust from which we were created. And Rabbah further taught, as a reward for which I included this, I thought it was interesting. Abraham said, Anochi afar ve'efer, I am but dust and ashes. So dust refers to the dust of the Sota water, and ashes refer to the ashes of the red heifer, of the ritual that's described in Parasha Chukat. So just interesting that we have two rituals, one ritual connected to dust and one ritual connected to ashes. And Abraham is really both, and we have those two mitzvahs. Okay, this teaches us two things: that a key element of the clarification of the Sota ritual is the soil of the tabernacle, which leads to one of two outcomes, innocence or guilty, and that it has this power due to Avraham, due to Abraham. That's where the dust comes from. And now looking back at the other reference of the dust, we have the verse in Genesis which says that man is created from dust. God formed the human from the soil's humus, as the fancy translation goes. Afar min ha'adama, blowing into his nostrils the breath of life. So afar, so mankind is created from the dust of the earth. Afar min ha'adama. And Rashi says this means we have two different midrashim which teach us two different things. One midrash says, Rashi quotes, that he gathered dust. Why do we have dust? Because this is where he's going to be buried, and therefore there's this cycle to the human life, and that created from dust and end in dust, and that's the natural cycle of existence. Number two, another explanation, he took his dust from that spot on which the holy temple with the altar of atonement was in later times to be built, that the dust was special dust. Whoa, right? We said the ritual, he took the dust from the tabernacle. And Rashi says that is the very same dust that mankind was created. Yeah, Esther.
Is there any record in the Talmud or anywhere of any woman who actually did die after this thing was done?
No record.
No.
Okay.
Yes.
Good question.
Okay, so Rashi notes that, and interestingly, Maimonides in Mishnah Torah, when he talks about Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the laws of the temple, the altar in the temple is to be constructed in a very precise location, which may never be changed. Where is the location? Isaac was prepared as a sacrifice on the temple's future site. Do you know where the altar for the holy temple is? It's where Yitzchak was almost sacrificed, where the Akedah happened. And by the way, keep going, the place on which David and Solomon built the altar is that same location. And Noach built an altar on that location also. And it's the altar, it's also the place where Cain and Abel, and it's also the first man offered a sacrifice there and was created at that very spot, says Maimonides. You want to know this place in Jerusalem? Is there
Where
a
is
Jewish
that?
connection to that place in Jerusalem where the altar used to be on the Temple Mount? Is there a Jewish connection that goes back before the creation of the state of Israel? Yeah, it goes back to the creation of humanity, and it goes back to the almost sacrifice of Isaac, and it goes back to the sacrifices of Noah and of Cain and Abel. And Maimonides is writing 1,000 years ago that spot in Jerusalem is sacred to the Jewish people, to our tradition. We are commanded to build an altar on that spot. And do you know what else happens from that spot? Earth is taken, sacred earth that was used to create the first human. And it's used for the Sota ritual. This is not just any dust. It's not just go out and grab a shovel and put some dust in the water. It's take not some dust, take the dust.
Okay, where is that?
Who is Ornan?
Where
That's
is
About
it?
on Har HaBayit. That's on the Temple Mount.
Who is
Where the
Ornan
wall
On the
Hayubusi?
Temple Mount.
where the wall is, no?
It's east of the wall. The wall is the western wall, the retaining wall of that area. That's where the Beit HaMikdash stood. That's where the Holy Temple stood. And that's where Maimonides said that David and Solomon built the altar on a spot that was so precious to the Jewish people, so precious to our people. So this is amazing.
Oh,
That
you didn't tell me. Who's
that this
Ornan?
dust-
Who's Ornan Hayubusi? Who is that? Ornan Hayubusi. Who is this?
the
Jebusite?
threshing floor where the plot for the Beit HaMikdash was purchased.
Okay, was I there when I was in Israel? Did I see that?
You were on the other side. If you were at the western wall, then you were within a few meters of it, but it's on the other side of the wall.
Well, there were two walls, right? And openings on both ends.
Yeah, and those walls are much later. Those walls are Second Temple walls. So we're even talking First Temple walls.
Are we allowed to step there, or is it?
There are different opinions. I have never been there in my life, and I have no desire to go there. It's not part of my experience, but there are people, and more in later years who have gone. So the connection here is saying there's a very unique and special place in Jerusalem. The altar is built there. The Beit HaMikdash stood there. And that's where the world was created. That's where everything came from. And that's the dust you're supposed to use to mix with the water to determine the truth. And just the concept of sin for a moment and understanding why this altar, this is where the sin offerings, this is where the atonement happens. What's the connection between the creation and the atonement? It's the concept of man's creation from a precise location, right? It's not just the rest of us, human beings, we're created wherever we're born, right? Our moment of birth happens in a hospital. It happens in a taxi cab. They can't get to the hospital. It happens wherever it happens, right? But it's a random place, more or less, or it's a place which was intended for. But the first creation, the first person, was deliberately created in a specific space, in a specific place, without inclination, right or left. Is that he was created with a bearing of absolute precision. He was created to be in precise form on a precise path. When he appears as he was created, he is in his place. Any deviation displaces him, meaning we all have a path that's connected to our being created human beings. And that path comes from the first moment of creation. And that's where we go. And then to deviate from that path is to deviate from our ultimate purpose of what we are supposed to be doing, what we're supposed to be contributing, what we're supposed to be achieving. And in Hebrew, you know the word for sin? In Hebrew, a sin. Hebrew has a lot of words for sin. But yeah, what were we going to say, Joel? The Hebrew
Right.
is
Hate.
chet. You said chet? Good.
Yeah, I said hate.
Thank Alice. The Hebrew
Yes.
word for sin is chet. In Hebrew, the word chet also means to miss, meaning if you shoot at a target and you miss it, that's a chet in Hebrew. It's not a sin, but it just means that the word itself to sin means to miss your mark.
Oh, hey, check.
Exactly. It means I have strayed from my al-chet. I was supposed to be on this path, and I ultimately went on that path. That's a chet. That's a sin. And okay. So the power of the tabernacle soul, of the tabernacle soil, is twofold. Mankind was created from the place of his atonement as a focused being, meaning the place of the altar, which is the place of atonement, is where we are created. He was created from the soil of the altar, whose location is precise and his direction is likewise very precise. That soil is the foundation of the world. The foundation is our path. And anything that deviates from it is deviating from the reason why we were created, from the purpose of our existence. And the Talmud in Yoma says that this rock that the world was created, shtia haitani created, that the altar is built on. It's described that the altar is built on the even hashtia, on the stone of foundation, the foundation stone. Why is it called shtia, that word? Because the world was created from it. And the Talmud comments, we learn the Mishnah, in accordance with the opinion of one who said that the world was created from Zion. As it was taught, the world was created from its center, and there's a proof text for this. The entire existence is emanating from this one point in Jewish thought. And for this reason, and this is our conclusion, for this reason, mankind, who is the essence of creation, right? If we look at creation, creation is 6 days. What's done on the sixth day? Mankind is created. That, from the Torah, in the Torah's view, mankind is the purpose of creation, is created from the soil, which is also the essence of creation, that very spot. The soil clarifies the status of the sota by connecting her to the point of essence and determining whether she coincides with it. Has she, in this particular case, the she, in this particular scenario, referring to her, to the woman who has been suspected of deviating, has she coincided with the purpose of her creation, with her essence, or has she deviated from it? And to go back all the way to our beginning, remember what we said? We said sota, and the Talmud, Reish Lakish, Amar Reish Lakish says, Ein Adam over avera, a person only sins, Ela im kain, when nichnas bo ruach shtut, when the spirit of folly, the spirit of shtut, and we'll say now, the spirit of straying from the purpose has entered them. So that's the whole, we call the mahalach. That's the whole path of study and understanding that we have learned connected to the sota. Rav Moshe Shapiro brought us into the language of sota and told us that sota is the word to stray. It's connected to the word, from the word to be foolish. This is something we see elsewhere. We see this with the word znut, which means harlotry, and connected to the idea of straying. So clearly there's a path, and clearly there's straying from the path. And then we learned about the essence as reflected in the dust that is involved in the sota ritual, and how that dust is meant to connect us to the purpose of our creation, mankind was created in the place of the altar, where the atonement was going to happen. We were created, what's atonement? When we've sinned, atonement brings us closer to our purpose. It brings us back. So we were created in the very place that we would come back to our purpose, to our essence. And that's why the sages saw this sota ritual as a paradigm for all other sins, because it's a way of checking ourselves. Drinking of the sota water is representative of something we should all do, which is checking ourselves and saying, am I connected to that place, to the origin of my creation? Am I connected to the altar? Am I connected to the place where humanity came from? Am I connected to the ideals of Abraham, of I am but dust and ashes, of the humility? Am I connected to that place where the Akedah took place, where the great sacrifices, where Noah offered his sacrifices, where Cain and Abel offered their sacrifices? Is that what's happening? Or have I strayed? Or am I far from that? And by drinking those waters in a metaphorical sense, we check ourselves and say, what is this dust doing to me? Is it something that's doing away with me, that's killing me? Or is it something that's going to bring me blessing? Am I consistent with the reason for my creation? Or am I not? And so the sages took this one ritual, which is an irrelevant ritual for us, which has no place in our lives and had no place in the lives of halachic Jews forever. And it's saying this ritual is going to teach you how to live. It's going to teach you how to ask questions about yourself. Am I fulfilling my purpose? Am I on my path? Or have I strayed from my path? That's it. That's the teaching of Rav Moshe Shapiro. The sota ritual, as irrelevant as it is essential for each and every one of us to find whether we've been faithful to ourselves. So that's the teaching for today. And now, questions, comments, objections?
No,
I have a question.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Where'd the water come from?
That's an excellent question. I don't know. I don't recall offhand the
Is there a
source.
stream or a brook near that place where the dust comes from?
I'll do my homework for next time.
Okay, because I want to make a sculpture about that.
Beautiful.
With the dust.
I would love to see that. I would
Yeah.
love to see that.
I sent you an email. I will
Okay.
make a sculpture about that. It's beautiful, a beautiful image.
Beautiful.
I have a
She
question.
spoke.
I have
Yeah.
a question too.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Joel. Joel,
It's
fine,
about
Alice,
the
go.
sota.
Go.
It's about the sota.
Yeah.
Herself. I remember many years ago, Rabbi Foreman's daughter came and talked about this as well, and she talked about the fact that the sota could allay, even if she's guilty, she could allay it because by performing other mitzvot, you accumulate. I don't know what word to use, brownie points for whatever.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
if you have, can you? I don't remember it well, the teaching, but I was fascinated with it. So I wonder, can you add to that in some way?
Yeah, that she could defer basically the testing of it as long as she is engaged in positive acts of mitzvot. It was a means of delaying the ritual. So there is something. The Talmud speaks about that at length. There is something.
Okay.
It's a good teaching for children too, because they make mistakes, which is only the beginning of making mistakes. We all make mistakes along the way, all the time, and being able to somehow atone from it, like you say to your child, for example, well, why did you hit that boy? Well, like a folly came to me, that's like as an excuse. Well, that folly has to be spoken to so that you won't do that again, because it's not a good thing, kind of. I don't know. I just saw all these kids using it as an excuse.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, just to go back to Alice for a moment, the Mishnah says that the sota, that her performing of mitzvot can delay the punishment even for many years. So even in the case that she would be not innocent, that the doing of mitzvot could defer that, even for many years. It says, yeah, Michael.
Yeah, it's funny. The Sota ritual is actually, there's a dedicated Wikipedia page on it, which I find interesting. And Susan Stromberg asked about that piece of land, or the where is it and can we go there? It's just about, when you're at the Western Wall, it's right above it. If you're a little bit hundreds of feet away, you'll see this Dome of the Rock, that
Right.
old thing. I went there, and I'll tell you about it in a second. There's two mosques there. There's this ugly Al-Aqsa mosque, which is gray, and there's this nice one with this gold roof you're not allowed to go into unless you're a Muslim. But I asked to go see it, and I went with a guide who showed me an old Jerusalem, a licensed guide who was an Israeli. And I asked to go up there too. He says, I'm not allowed to take you up there. So I'm going to transfer you to a friend of mine I work with who's a Muslim. Only Muslims guys are allowed to take. He's an Israeli Muslim. He's licensed by the Israeli government as a qualified guide, and he took me up there. I learned a lot from the guy who is a Muslim. So he said, first of all, he says a lot of religious Jews would not actually come here. And by the way, whatever the rabbi said, this guy explained to me too, that according to what we understand in Judaism, this is what happened. The Muslims also believe from that exact same spot, their last prophet, who was Muhammad, ascended to heaven on a white horse. But he said something very interesting. A lot of religious Jews wouldn't come here because when the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, they took the tablets, the two sets apparently were there, the good ones and the broken ones, and they were never found. So an argument could be made that maybe they didn't take them, maybe they were just upset and smashed them and lying underneath the ground here. So possibly you're walking here, we could be walking on this sacred land on which these tablets are underneath. That's why a lot of people won't walk here. I don't know if that's why, Rabbi Scheier, you said you wouldn't go there. Is that because of that, or?
Yeah,
Tahara,
there's a debate about whether there's kedusha, whether the sanctity of the holy temple is connected to the holy temple's existing, or is it embedded in the land itself and it's there forever, waiting for the third temple to be rebuilt. So I grew up with the tradition that you don't go, we're not worthy of going, not sufficiently clean to go. And one day I hope I'll get there, and at some point in some time.
I was innocent and naive. I didn't know that there was a thought you shouldn't even go there until I was there, and the Arab explained it to me.
The Arab.
There's the idea of Torah and Tumah also, right? It was what you said, Rabbi. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we don't have a way to purify ourselves since the temple was destroyed, so that's a problem too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Well, I feel when we go to the wall
Never get it done.
and we touch the wall, that we are purifying, we are in contact, we are touching.
Yeah, look, there's
matters.
a spiritual concept of purity, and there's also
Yes.
a legal concept of purity. And the legal technical concept of purity is related to mikvah, it's related to the functions of the body, it's related to a whole number of factors that need to be required when somebody would walk into that sacred space. Joel, what were you going to say?
You were talking or asking before about water. Is that nobody been down? You can get down to a flowing stream if you go through the wall, and it's quite a thing. I mean, getting there is a problem because it's very narrow, but there's a steady stream of water underneath.
Really?
Yeah. Been there, done that.
Wow.
Right, there is a stream called the Shiloach stream, which would provide water for some of the rituals for the water libation that would be done on Sukkot. But the Torah doesn't specify where these waters are from. They're just sacred waters. So
the Shiloh stream is outside the walls.
Yeah.
I've walked in there.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Well,
I have to.
walk into the walls and then down.
Wow.
You go downstairs, you go downstairs just outside where the wall is.
There
To
is
the left.
That's to the left. There's a study area, and there's stairs, and you go down.
Beautiful. Amazing.
But is that generally open to the public?
Sure.
Okay, Susan, something for our next mission to Israel.
Yeah, for sure.
To go visit that. Okay, with that, we're going to close because I have to sign off.
Thank you, Rabbi.
To sign off now.
Thank
So,
you.